Look at her hand. She's a shaking, pathetic drunk and a disgrace to this family. My sister-in-law Karen screamed those words across the ballroom at my father's 70th birthday party. The jazz band stopped in the middle of a note. 50 wealthy country club guests froze beneath the crystal chandeliers, their conversations dying as every face turned toward me. Beside Karen stood a nervous-looking stranger in a cheap gray suit. She had brought an addiction specialist to my father's celebration for one purpose: to ambush me publicly and have me taken to rehab. My right hand was trembling violently. The ice inside my water glass rattled against the crystal, giving Karen exactly the image she wanted everyone to see. I looked at my younger brother, Daniel, expecting him to step forward and tell his wife the truth. Instead, he lowered his eyes and stared at the scuff marks on his expensive shoes. He said nothing. He abandoned his own sister to protect the illusion of peace in his marriage. That betrayal hurt more than any bullet I had ever taken. Karen tightened her manicured fingers around the arm of the man beside her. "This is Dr. Evans," she announced. "He's an addiction specialist. We have a bed waiting for you at his facility tonight, Bella. Do the right thing. Stop humiliating Mom and Dad." I looked toward my father. The man who had taught me to throw a baseball was shrinking into a high-backed leather chair, staring at his untouched steak. My mother stood nearby with one hand pressed to her mouth. Neither of them defended me. The tremor intensified. Water spilled across my knuckles. The people around me did not see a naval officer. They saw a broken woman interfering with their champagne, caviar, and polite country club fantasy. But I was a commander in the United States Navy. I was an explosive ordnance disposal officer. I dismantled threats for a living, and I did not retreat when someone tried to ambush me. I slammed the glass onto the table. The heavy thud cut through the silence. With my functioning left hand, I grabbed the delicate navy silk covering my right arm and pulled. The fabric ripped loudly. I tore the sleeve from my wrist to my shoulder, exposing the brutal crater carved into my bicep. The entire ballroom gasped. There were no needle marks. There was no evidence of alcoholism. There was only war. Concave muscle, twisted scar tissue, and the jagged path where a 7.62mm armor-piercing round had pulverized my bicep and severed my radial nerve. I planted my feet and pulled air deep into my lungs. "Do they teach basic neurology at whatever strip mall clinic you operate out of, doctor?" My voice carried the same command tone I used on a flight deck. The man in the cheap suit flinched and stepped backward. "This is not alcohol withdrawal," I said, staring directly at Karen. "This is permanent nerve damage caused by a sniper round." Her smug expression cracked. Panic flashed behind her mascara, but her ego would not let her retreat in front of the people she had invited to witness my humiliation. Her face flushed, and she opened her mouth, preparing to accuse me of inventing a war story to cover a drinking problem. She never got the chance. A massive man in a crisp navy dress uniform pushed past a stunned waiter. His eyes locked onto my damaged arm, and all the color drained from his weathered face. He was Commander Vance, a combat-hardened SEAL, and a guest of one of my father's business associates. He took 2 unsteady steps toward me. Then his legs gave out. His knees struck the polished hardwood floor with a sickening thud. He covered his mouth with 2 calloused hands, and tears spilled down his face. "That scar," he choked out. "That trajectory." I read the after-action report. The ballroom became so quiet that I could hear people breathing. "You dragged my petty officer out of the kill zone," he continued, his voice breaking. "If you hadn't stepped in front of that bullet, my men would have come home in body bags." Karen's jaw fell open. Dr. Evans looked as though he wanted the floor to swallow him. I looked down at my shaking hand. The ice in my glass had settled, but the sound of rattling crystal still echoed inside my head because I had heard it 3 weeks earlier, on Thanksgiving, when Karen first decided that my physical agony was a social inconvenience and that the money I had earned in combat belonged to her. Thanksgiving began with a miserable drive south from the Pentagon. Interstate 395 was locked in traffic, and red brake lights bled across the wet asphalt. The heater in my 10-year-old sedan was barely functioning, blowing stale, lukewarm air against my face. By mile marker 12, the damaged nerve in my right arm had begun to fail. The pain was not a dull ache. It felt like a white-hot wire wrapping itself around the bone. My muscles tightened, and my arm became a burning anchor hanging from my shoulder. I steered with my left hand while pinning my right elbow against my ribs. Every vibration from the road shot through my spine. Keeping the car inside the lane required almost all the strength I had left. When I finally reached my parents' house in Northern Virginia, I parked behind Karen's brand new Lexus SUV. The oversized vehicle occupied 2 spaces. Dealer tags were still attached to the bumper, and the chrome trim gleamed beneath the gray November sky. It smelled of fresh wax, expensive detailing, and money that had never been earned by the person spending it. I turned off my engine and sat alone in the cold for a full minute. I forced myself to breathe slowly. In. Out. I locked my damaged arm against my body until the visible shaking eased, then pushed open the heavy door and stepped onto the driveway. The house smelled of roasted turkey, butter, and synthetic vanilla air freshener. I was still wearing my Navy working uniform after a 14-hour shift, conducting threat assessments inside the Pentagon. My combat boots felt heavy against the hardwood. Sweat had dried beneath my collar, and exhaustion sat like grit behind my eyes. Karen was waiting in the hallway with a crystal glass of sparkling cider. She wore a cream cashmere sweater and heavy gold bangles that clinked whenever she moved. She looked me up and down, slowly and deliberately, before curling her upper lip. "You wore that to Thanksgiving dinner?" She spoke loudly enough for everyone in the house to hear. I did not answer. I stepped past her and continued toward the living room. Her heels clicked aggressively behind me. "I suppose when you're single and living in a tiny apartment, you don't have to care about appearances or a mortgage." She sighed dramatically and swirled her cider. "You have no idea how stressful homeownership is, Bella. The maintenance is draining us." I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. 6 months earlier, Daniel had called me in the middle of the night while I was stationed overseas. He had been crying so hard that I could barely understand him. He claimed that contractors had discovered toxic black mold inside the walls of his house. He told me the property was dangerous and that he and Karen could not afford the emergency repairs. I had been living in a combat zone, sleeping in body armor, and waking to mortar alarms. Without hesitation, I wired him $20,000 from my hazard pay. That money had been earned in dust, fear, exhaustion, and blood. I did not ask for repayment. I only wanted my little brother to be safe. At dinner, the porcelain plates were perfectly aligned on a blinding white linen tablecloth. Karen sat across from me and pointed toward a bottle of red wine near my plate. "Pass the wine." She did not ask. She ordered. Without thinking, I reached with my right hand. I wrapped my fingers around the neck of the bottle and lifted it 2 inches from the polished table. Then the severed nerve misfired. There was no warning, only a violent electrical spasm from my elbow to my wrist. My fingers jerked open. The heavy bottle flew forward and struck a crystal water goblet. Glass shattered. Red wine exploded across the white linen and spread toward the edges of the table. For a moment, the dining room disappeared. The dark stain looked exactly like the arterial blood I had watched pump from Chief Petty Officer Marquez's leg into the Afghan sand. It was dark, viscous, and impossible to stop. Karen shrieked and jumped backward, scraping her chair across the floor as though I had thrown acid at her. "Look at you," she screamed, pointing directly at my face. "You're drunk. It's 3 in the afternoon, and you're shaking like a drunk." The room fell silent. I looked at Daniel. He stared intensely at his green beans. He did not blink. He did not tell her about my injury. He did not remind her that I had been at work since before sunrise. He watched his wife destroy my character in front of our parents and chose cowardice. My mother silently retrieved paper towels from the kitchen. My father cleared his throat and stared through the window at the dead grass. I sat there in the uniform of the United States Navy while my damaged hand trembled against my thigh, and my own family treated me like an addict because confronting Karen would have made dinner uncomfortable. I did not apologize. Instead, I looked past her and into the kitchen. Bright, recessed lights reflected from a brand new island made of imported, dark-veined Italian granite. Beside it stood a massive commercial-grade stainless steel refrigerator. There had never been any toxic black mold. My $20,000 had not repaired dangerous walls, It had not protected my brother from a health hazard. It had purchased a luxury kitchen. My blood money had paid for Karen's vanity. Red wine dripped from the edge of the table and struck the floor one drop at a time. Each drop pulled me deeper into the memory of Helmand Province. The temperature had been nearly 120 degrees. The air tasted of diesel exhaust, burning plastic, and copper. An RPG struck the compound wall with an earth-shaking crack, sending dirt and jagged fragments raining onto our helmets. Through the smoke, I saw Chief Marquez lying in the open. His left leg had been shredded. Bone and raw tissue were visible through his torn uniform, and he was trying to drag himself through the sand while enemy fire tore across the kill zone. Training overrode fear. I broke cover and sprinted toward him. I grabbed the nylon drag handle on the back of his tactical vest and pulled with everything I had. Then the sniper fired. I never heard the shot. You rarely hear the one that hits you. There was no cinematic slow motion. There was only blinding heat ripping through my right bicep. The armor-piercing round pulverized muscle and snapped my radial nerve like a dry branch. I hit the dirt, and my brain ordered my right hand to grab my rifle. The hand did not move. It lay useless in the sand while blood soaked through my uniform. My dominant hand was dead, but I kept pulling Marquez until other sailors reached us and dragged us both behind cover. The memory vanished as quickly as it had appeared. The freezing air conditioning of my parents' dining room struck my sweat-damp collar. Karen stood with her arms crossed over her cashmere sweater, tapping one designer heel against the floor. "Are you going to clean up your mess?" she demanded, as though I were a disobedient child. I pushed back my chair and walked into the kitchen. Before reaching for the paper towels, I placed my left palm against the granite island. The stone was cold, solid, and flawless beneath the expensive lights. $20,000. I traced one of the dark veins with my finger. This was what my severed nerve had purchased. This was what my shattered arm had paid for. I returned to the table, dropped the paper towels over the wine, and looked directly at Daniel. He still refused to raise his chin. His silence felt like a rusted blade, turning slowly in my stomach. At 5 the next morning, my alarm buzzed inside my dark Arlington apartment. Waking up had been a battle every day since I was evacuated from the combat theater. I sat on the edge of my mattress, with my feet against the freezing floor. My right arm hung from my shoulder like a wet log. I dragged myself to the bathroom and began the humiliating process of dressing in my khaki uniform. Tasks civilians performed without thought took me 10 times longer. I managed the trousers and pulled the shirt over my shoulders. Then I began working the buttons with my left hand. The first button went through, then the second. At the third, the nerve misfired. A tremor tore through my bicep, and my right hand began slapping uncontrollably against my chest. I dropped the fabric. Sweat formed along my forehead, despite the cold air. Under the harsh fluorescent light, I stared at the exhausted woman in the mirror. For a moment, I wanted to smash the glass. I wanted to strike the wall until my knuckles bled. Instead, I closed my eyes and forced myself to continue. "Push through," I whispered to the empty room. Outside that bathroom, I was a commander. Outside that door, I had to be iron. At 1400 hours, I stood at the head of a polished oak table inside a secure Pentagon briefing room. A vice admiral and 6 senior staff officers watched as I presented a global threat assessment. With my left hand, I held a red laser pointer steady over a satellite image. Beneath the table, my right arm was shaking violently. If I allowed it to move freely, it would strike the wood and expose my condition to everyone in the room. I dropped my shoulder and pinned my elbow against my ribs with enough force to leave a dark bruise. The pain burned, but my expression never changed. I did not stutter. I did not break eye contact. In that building, showing a crack in the armor could end a career. If senior officers believed my body had become unreliable, they could bench me before considering what my mind was still capable of doing. I completed the briefing, walked the sterile corridors back to my cramped cubicle, and finally allowed my right arm to fall against my thigh. The tremor returned immediately. As I reached for my thermos with my good hand, my phone vibrated against the glass desk. The screen displayed a message from Karen. It was not a simple text, but a massive block of accusation. Daniel and I are deeply concerned about your escalating alcoholism. Your behavior at Thanksgiving was erratic. Throwing wine across the table was dangerous. We found a discreet outpatient rehabilitation clinic in Alexandria. Please check in tonight. Do not embarrass Mom and Dad anymore. I read the message twice. There was no mention of my damaged nerve. No mention of the crystal goblet the bottle had struck. No mention of Karen screaming at me in front of my family. There was certainly no mention of the $20,000. I sat back and forced myself to stop reading the message as a wounded sister. I began analyzing it the way I examined the wiring of an improvised explosive device. I stripped away the emotion and studied the mechanism. Karen was not concerned about my liver. She was terrified because she had seen me looking at the new granite island and refrigerator. She knew I had discovered the lie. Her accusation was a preemptive defense. By labeling me an unstable alcoholic, she was building a firewall around the stolen money. If I confronted her, she could tell the family I was confused, irrational, or hallucinating from withdrawal. She had taken a genuine combat injury and transformed it into a character defect, so no one would believe me when I demanded the truth. 3 gray dots appeared beneath the message. Seconds later, another text arrived. We are praying for your recovery, Bella. The audacity tasted like battery acid. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I wanted to send bank records. I wanted to threaten a lawsuit and expose every lie. I wanted to tell Karen exactly what I thought of her debt-ridden country club fantasy. Instead, I pressed the side button and turned the screen black. Then I deployed one of the most effective weapons in any conflict: absolute silence. I refused to defend my sobriety to a thief. Explaining myself would have validated her accusation. Arguing with a liar would have allowed her to control the battlefield. She had fired the first shot. My campaign had begun. 2 hours later, I drove through heavy Virginia traffic to Walter Reed National Military Medical Center for my neurological evaluation. The hospital smelled of industrial bleach, floor wax, and quiet endurance. I passed a young Marine in a wheelchair whose legs ended at mid-thigh. I passed an Army Ranger learning to balance on a carbon fiber prosthetic. Their bodies displayed visible receipts of war. As I walked among them, my hand began to spasm. Karen's words echoed in my head, shaking like a drunk. Embarrassing your parents. The gaslighting was working. She had planted shame inside me, and I was feeding it. I bent my elbow and shoved my trembling hand deep into my trouser pocket. Even among warriors who had left parts of themselves overseas, I tried to conceal my injury. Later, I sat at a chipped formica table in the Walter Reed cafeteria across from Rear Admiral Avery Butcher. She was 60 years old, a Navy legend with eyes that could strip paint from a bulkhead. She carried her scars openly and expected everyone around her to do the same. I reached for a paper cup of coffee. The nerve misfired before my fingers closed around it. The cup tipped, and hot coffee spilled over my knuckles. Panic flooded my chest. My body reacted before my mind could stop it. I pulled my right hand beneath the table and pinned it against my thigh, waiting for the same disgust I had seen on Karen's face. Admiral Butcher did not gasp. She calmly dropped a napkin over the spilled coffee and leaned forward. Put your hand back on the table, Commander. I froze. Do not hide that hand from me. Slowly, I brought it into view. It shook against the formica. Butcher stared directly at the tremor. I heard about Thanksgiving, she said. Shame tightened my throat, and I lowered my eyes. Look at me, Cook. I raised my chin immediately. You treat that tremor like a character defect, she said. Like a dirty secret, like an embarrassment. She pointed toward my shaking hand. It is not a defect. It is a receipt. You paid the physical price so your enlisted men could breathe today. You bought their lives with that nerve. Never hide the receipt of your courage to make a coward comfortable. Her words struck harder than any reprimand. For 3 years, I had treated my damaged hand as proof that I was broken. In one sentence, she showed me what it truly represented. The tremor did not disappear, but the shame did. I left my hand on the table. 10 minutes later, Butcher and I were walking through the main hospital corridor when a booming voice called my name. Commander Cook. I turned and saw Chief Petty Officer Marquez moving toward me on 2 forearm crutches. His left leg ended at the knee, were a black carbon fiber prosthetic connected to a heavy rubber foot. He dropped one crutch, balanced on his remaining leg, and wrapped both arms around me. His embrace smelled of cheap cologne, stale sweat, and overwhelming gratitude. "You came back," he whispered against my shoulder. "You actually came back for me." When he released me, he wiped his eyes and motioned toward a 7-year-old boy waiting nearby in faded jeans and a Captain America shirt. "Leo, come here. This is the officer who made sure I came home to you." The boy approached and looked directly at my mangled arm. I tensed. Children were honest, and I expected fear or discomfort. Instead, Leo reached out with both hands and wrapped his fingers around my trembling right hand. His small grip steadied it. "Thank you for saving my dad," he whispered. My throat closed. At my parents' house, my own brother had stared at his shoes, while his wife called me a disgrace. In a hospital corridor smelling of bleach and floor wax, a child held my broken hand as though it were precious. Blood did not create family. Loyalty did. When I walked into the cold Virginia sunlight, I did not put my hand back in my pocket. I allowed it to shake openly at my side. As I reached my car, my phone rang. The caller identification showed Daniel's name. He had not spoken to me since Thanksgiving. I let it ring 3 times before answering. "Bella," he said. His voice was thin and strained. "Dad's 70th birthday dinner is Saturday. It's at Oak Creek Country Club. He really wants you there. We all do. I'm not sitting at a table with your wife. Not after Thanksgiving, and not after she accused me of being an alcoholic, to cover up the money you stole." "She dropped it," he said too quickly. "I talked to her. She dropped the rehab idea. She just wants peace for Dad. Please come. No drama." Every tactical instinct warned me that it was an ambush. Daniel sounded as though he were reading a prepared script, but I remembered the little boy who used to hide behind my legs during thunderstorms. I remembered wiring him $20,000 because I believed he was in danger. Against my better judgment, the older sister in me overruled the commander. 2 hours, I said. If she starts anything, I leave. On Saturday evening, I stood before the bathroom mirror in my apartment. I was 38 years old, and exhaustion had carved shadows beneath my eyes. My closet held rows of long-sleeved blouses and heavy garments I normally wore around my parents. They were armor designed to spare civilians from the discomfort of seeing what war had done to me. That night, I chose a sleeveless navy cocktail dress. I stood before the mirror and examined the crater in my arm. The bullet had not left a neat scar. It had removed a mass of tissue, leaving the bicep concave and twisted where muscle and nerve had been pulverized. A cream silk shawl lay folded at the end of my bed. Normally, I would have draped it over my shoulders before entering a country club. Admiral Butcher's voice echoed in my head. Never hide the receipt. I left the shawl behind. Oak Creek Country Club smelled of old money, fresh wax, and arrogance. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across the ballroom, while a 4-piece jazz band played in the corner. Waiters in white coats circulated with champagne and silver trays of appetizers. I walked through the heavy oak doors with my posture straight and my scarred arm uncovered. Several guests stared. When I met their eyes, they looked away. My parents hurried toward me. My father smiled and clapped my good shoulder. My mother kissed my cheek with visible relief. Daniel approached next. He smelled of expensive scotch and anxiety. Without meeting my eyes, he gave me a short, tight embrace. "Thank you for coming," he murmured. For 30 minutes, the illusion held. The gathering almost felt normal. I stood near a high table, holding sparkling water in my right hand. The rhythmic tremor made the ice clink softly, but I did not hide it. Then the hair along my neck rose. Across the room, Karen stood beside the mahogany bar. She was not speaking or drinking. She held a leather purse tightly against her chest. The man in the cheap gray suit stood beside her. Her expression was cold and focused, like a sniper waiting for a target to enter the crosshairs. The jazz band stopped. Karen stepped onto the dance floor and struck a silver spoon against a wine glass. Clink, clink, clink. Conversations faded. 50 guests turned toward her. The man in the gray suit moved to her side. I looked at Daniel. He lowered his head and retreated into the crowd. He had known. He had lured me there and delivered me to his wife. Karen pointed toward the glass in my trembling hand. "Look at her hand," she screamed. "She's a shaking, pathetic drunk and a disgrace to this family." After I exposed my scar, and Commander Vance dropped to his knees, the man Karen had introduced as Dr. Evans took one step backward, then another. He looked from my shredded sleeve to the weeping seal and understood that he had participated in a public defamation attempt against a decorated officer. He turned and slipped through a side door. I ignored him and focused on Karen. The color had drained from her face. The pearls around her neck looked less like jewelry and more like a chain pulling her underwater. I stepped around Commander Vance and moved toward her. I did not shout. Shouting was for people who had lost control. "You brought a doctor here to fix me, Karen." She backed against the bar. "Let's discuss what actually needs fixing. Let's discuss the rot inside your house." I turned toward the guests. My hand continued to tremble, but my voice remained steady. 6 months ago, my younger brother called me while I was stationed in a combat zone. He claimed his house was infested with toxic black mold. He said it was a health hazard. I wired him $20,000 from my combat hazard pay. A murmur moved through the ballroom. "My blood money," I continued. "Money earned while people were trying to kill me." I pointed my damaged hand toward Karen. "You did not repair any mold. You bought imported Italian granite countertops. You bought the oversized Lexus parked outside. You bought the pearls around your neck." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "You stole money earned in combat to finance your luxury lifestyle. When you realized I had seen the kitchen, you panicked. You decided to label me an alcoholic so nobody would believe me when I demanded answers. You weaponized my permanent nerve damage to hide your theft." The silence became suffocating. Ice melted inside untouched glasses. My father stepped out of the crowd. His face had gone pale. He walked directly toward Daniel. "Is this true?" he asked. "Did you take your sister's hazard pay for a kitchen remodel?" I watched my brother. It was his last chance to accept responsibility. He looked at our father, then at me. His lips parted, but he said nothing. He lowered his chin and stared at his shoes. His silence was a confession. Something inside my chest snapped. The final thread of loyalty connecting me to my brother broke, and for the first time, the loss did not hurt. It left only emptiness. I retrieved my purse. "I am a commander in the United States Navy," I said. "I have value. I do not need your pity, and I no longer need this family." I turned away. The guests separated as I crossed the ballroom. They pulled their expensive dresses and jackets out of my path. Their eyes followed the crater in my arm, but the judgment had vanished. Only shock remained. I pushed through the oak doors and entered the freezing night. The air smelled of pine needles and cold asphalt. It bit my exposed skin, but it also felt clean. My hand continued to tremble. The nerve damage was permanent. That physical war would never end. Yet as I crossed the dark parking lot, my chest felt lighter than it had in years. I was free. The next morning, I woke with my arm burning from the physical toll of adrenaline. My phone vibrated continuously on the nightstand. There were 47 missed calls, a dozen voicemails, and a stream of messages. I ignored Daniel and opened the thread from my mother. "Please come home, Bella. You're tearing the family apart. You need to be the bigger person. Family forgives." I stared at the cracked plaster above my bed. Be the bigger person. It was the universal command of enablers. In my family, being the bigger person meant lying flat in the dirt so toxic people would not have to step over me. It meant swallowing my own blood so I would not ruin their appetite. I deleted the message. I made coffee, opened my military-issued tough book, and drafted a directive using BLUF format. Bottom line up front. Subject: Rules of Engagement. Condition 1. Karen would handwrite a formal apology to all 50 guests who had witnessed the ambush. She would explicitly admit that she had lied about my sobriety to conceal a financial theft. I wanted a copy of every letter. Condition 2. Daniel had 30 days to present a legally binding repayment plan for the $20,000. On day 31, my attorney would file a civil lawsuit for fraud and theft by deception. Their assets would be subpoenaed. There would be no telephone calls and no negotiations. They were not to contact me until the conditions were satisfied. I pressed send. For 3 days, Northern Virginia remained silent. On Thursday afternoon, someone knocked sharply on my door. A delivery driver stood outside, holding a massive glass vase filled with expensive blue hydrangeas. I carried the arrangement into my kitchen and removed the small envelope. Karen's handwriting covered the card. "I'm sorry if you felt attacked. Emotions were high on Saturday. We all said things we didn't mean. Let's move past this." I read it twice. It was a perfect narcissistic non-apology. She was not sorry for stealing my money. She was not sorry for trying to destroy my reputation. She was sorry that I had fought back and exposed her. I crushed the card in my hand, carried the entire arrangement to the dumpster, and threw it inside. The vase shattered against the garbage bags. The sweet smell of the flowers mixed with rotten food as the metal door slammed closed. That evening, my father called. I answered, but did not speak. Heavy breathing came through the receiver, followed by a broken sob. "I saw your arm, Bella," he said, "when you tore that sleeve. Jesus Christ." He struggled to continue. "While you were out there getting torn apart by sniper fire, I was calling you to complain about my golf swing and my lawn. I am so sorry, kid. I'm sorry I didn't protect you." I listened without telling him that everything was fine. It was not fine. He needed to understand the weight of his failure. "I cut Daniel off," he finally said, his voice hardening. "He came to the house asking for a loan to pay the lawyer you threatened him with. I told him to leave. I cut his credit lines. He and Karen will not receive another dollar from me until your money is returned." The supply lines supporting their false life had been severed. "Thank you, Dad," I said. "I'll see you Friday." Friday was my promotion ceremony at Naval Station Norfolk. My parents would sit in the VIP row. To preserve their social image, Karen and Daniel would have to attend and pretend the family was intact. This time, they would be entering my territory. The aircraft hangar at Naval Station Norfolk smelled of ocean salt, hot asphalt, and jet fuel. The massive steel doors stood open, revealing the gray hull of an aircraft carrier. 300 folding chairs were arranged in perfect rows across the concrete floor, occupied by sailors and officers in brilliant white dress uniforms. That morning, I would receive the silver eagles of a Navy captain. I stood beside the podium, with my boots shoulder-width apart and my spine straight. My father sat in the center of the front row. He wore a dark suit and looked toward the stage with fierce pride. Daniel sat beside him. He appeared exhausted. Dark shadows surrounded his eyes, and the strain of his collapsing finances showed in his face. Karen occupied the next chair in a pale pink Chanel suit. She held her leather purse tightly in her lap and looked terrified. There were no chandeliers or jazz musicians in the hangar. There were no country club friends and no hired doctors. The people surrounding her did not care about luxury vehicles or granite countertops. They cared about honor, sacrifice, and whether the person beside them would risk death to bring them home. Karen had no power there. Rear Admiral Butcher approached the podium. She looked down at her prepared speech, folded the pages in half, and pushed them aside. "We are here to pin the rank of captain on an officer who understands the true cost of command," she began. Her voice boomed through the hangar. 3 years ago, in Helmand Province, a routine patrol became a slaughterhouse. An explosive device detonated. A chief petty officer went down in open ground. His leg was shredded, and he was bleeding out in the kill zone. Daniel stopped breathing. Under heavy sniper fire, Commander Cook broke cover. She sprinted across 50 yards of open sand, grabbed that chief by the drag handle on his vest, and pulled a grown man carrying nearly 80 pounds of equipment toward safety. Butcher stepped away from the podium. She did it while taking a 7.62mm armor-piercing round through her right bicep. The hangar was completely silent. That bullet shattered her radial nerve and left her with permanent, agonizing damage. It also left her with a violent physical tremor. Karen sank lower in her chair. "I have heard whispers in civilian circles," Butcher said, raising her voice. "I have heard that Captain Cook's shaking hand has been called weakness, that it has been treated as something broken or shameful." Her eyes locked onto Karen. "Let me be absolutely clear. That tremor is not weakness. It is not a flaw. It is the undeniable physical evidence of courage. It is the receipt she paid, so another American father could return home to his son." A roar erupted through the hangar. Chief Marquez stepped into view near the wing of a parked aircraft. He wore his dress-white uniform and leaned on a black crutch. The ribbon of his Purple Heart gleamed against his chest. In the second row, Commander Vance rose and snapped to attention. Then 300 sailors and officers stood. Heavy boots struck concrete. Applause rolled through the hangar like thunder. My father stood with tears streaming down his face. Daniel clapped until his hands turned red. He looked directly at me and silently mouthed, "I'm sorry." Karen remained seated for 3 seconds. Then the pressure of the entire room forced her to stand. She clapped awkwardly, her face burning with humiliation. Her manufactured empire had finally collapsed. Admiral Butcher pinned the Silver Eagle insignias to my collar and stepped back. "Attention on deck," a Master Chief shouted. The applause stopped. 300 sailors snapped their heels together. I raised my mangled right hand to the brim of my white cover. The tremor shook violently against my brow. It was relentless, visible, and raw, but I held the salute. 300 men and women raised their hands and saluted my shaking arm in return. Over the following 8 months, Daniel made an automatic payment of $1,200 on the first day of every month. There were no excuses and no missed deposits. He understood that my attorney had never been bluffing. One afternoon, while I was working at my kitchen island, an email from Karen appeared in my personal inbox. I finished my coffee, washed the mug, and wiped the counter before opening it. I let her wait. The message was a long confession. Daniel had moved into the downstairs guest room 3 months earlier. He had told her he would file for divorce unless she confronted the damage she had caused. Cut off from my father's money and isolated from her enablers, Karen's ego had finally cracked. She admitted stealing my hazard pay for the kitchen. She admitted bringing the doctor to the country club. At the bottom of the email, she wrote the ugliest truth. "I wanted to destroy you because I was jealous. You had purpose, medals, and respect. I had a massive house with absolutely nothing inside it. I am sorry. Please give me 10 minutes. I did not feel triumphant. I felt tired. I agreed to meet her at a diner in Alexandria. The restaurant smelled of burnt coffee, bacon grease, and wet asphalt. Karen sat alone in a corner booth. Her designer armor was gone. She wore a plain gray sweater. Her hair was pulled into a messy clip, and the skin beneath her eyes was swollen. I slid into the booth and placed both hands on the table. My right hand trembled lightly against the scratched laminate. I made no attempt to hide it. Karen looked at the tremor, and tears filled her eyes. "I'm sorry, Bella," she whispered. "I took your money. I lied to your parents. I tried to humiliate you. It was evil. I was evil." I ordered black coffee and waited for it to arrive before responding. I took a slow sip and set the heavy mug down. The cold rage that had carried me through the previous months was gone. Across from me sat a broken, insecure woman rather than an enemy. "I accept your apology, Karen." Relief spread across her face. Her shoulders dropped, and she reached across the table for my hand. I pulled back and raised my palm. "Stop." Her expression faltered. "Do not misunderstand me. I accept your apology because I refuse to carry the weight of hating you. This damaged arm is heavy enough. I will not drag your garbage with me, too." She swallowed. "Trust is a mirror. You did not scratch it. You took a steel hammer and smashed it into powder. I will attend family gatherings when I choose. I will be civil. I will treat any children you and Daniel have with kindness. But the cracks are permanent." She began crying quietly. "We are family," I said. "But we will never be friends. Do you accept that boundary?" For once, she did not argue or manipulate the story. She nodded. I placed $5 on the table, stood, and walked out. Today, I sit behind the wheel of my fully restored 1967 Mustang convertible at the edge of the naval base. The top is down, and the air smells of ocean salt and exhaust. My right hand rests on the wooden steering wheel. The scar from the sniper round remains deep. Concave tissue stretches tightly over damaged muscle, and the severed nerve continues to misfire in a soft, permanent rhythm. The hand is scarred, it is damaged, but it is mine. It is the receipt for the lives that came home. I have learned that no honest life can be built on a foundation of disrespect. Either you enforce your boundaries, or you allow people to walk across your grave. With my left hand, I turn the ignition key. The 289 cubic inch V8 engine comes alive with a deep mechanical roar. The chassis vibrates, and the power travels through the steering column into my trembling hand. For once, the two vibrations move together. I smile, pull the gear shift into position, and press my combat boot against the accelerator. The rear tires bite into the asphalt as the engine roars. Then I drive toward the blazing Virginia sunset, carrying my scars in the open and leaving the people who once used them against me far behind. Sometimes, walking away from toxic blood is the bravest mission a person will ever undertake.